Okay, we're going to start here by just making some assumptions on the type of bread that we're going to make. We are going to make a standard pan bread. The pan size that we have available is what is referred to as a standard 1 pound loaf pan. We want a target finished weight of around 1 pound or 454 grams. And so we are going to set a scaling weight for that of 580 grams. We want to get 2 loaves out of it. And we have a hydration plan of 58% water because we're using all-purpose flour. We're going to go a little bit on the security side, and we're going to go with a little bit lower water level. So now let's start building our formula. The first thing we need is flour. We need salt, we need yeast, and of course we need water. And for this example, we're just going to keep things very, very simple, and we're going to go with 1,000 grams of all-purpose white flour, and that's going to be our 100%. So we're going to go with 2% salt, which is an industry standard. We're going to go with 1% yeast, which is also basically an industry standard for dry activated yeast. So we need 20 grams of salt, we need 10 grams of yeast, and we're going to go with our security amount of water there at 58%, and so that's ultimately going to give us 580 grams. Now this formula that we have right here is the base formula, where we're going to be building a lot of different types of breads from it. It's a good standard to start to work from, and it's the percentages here that we're talking about the most, okay? So don't worry so much about 1,000 grams being the amount of flour we're using. The most important thing is the percentages, 100%, 2%, 1%, and 58% on the water. Okay, so we got our base formula set up, as we've talked about. This is what we're going to build everything from. We're going to go with a standard pan bread. We've already done a pan capacity evaluation, so we know that the capacity of this pan that we're using is about 1,230 grams. Now, I've explained it all in my pan size calculation video, but really quickly, length times width times height in centimeters will give you the total grams capacity for that pan. So we've done the calculation. We know that that pan will hold 1,230 grams of dough. So the scaling weight that I've opted is 580 grams. I've decided to go with 47% of the pan capacity, which is about right. Now think about it. You allow your loaf to double or your dough to double in size. After it's doubled in size in the proofing, it's kind of right around close to the top of the pan. You get it into the oven. Now you get your oven spring, and you've got a perfect uniform loaf based on that pan size. So this is a nice number to work from. I like to normally be in and around the 40 to 50%, maybe 55% maximum for that size pan. But this is really, really right in the ballpark and perfect. So now we're just going to start swapping different things into our formula. You can see that nothing changes in our base formula, but we're swapping things in and out. No problem. Providing that we continue with a nice tight absorption level, you're going to have good success. Honey's replaces sugar, and butter replaces shortening, and now we're going to throw some raisins in there. Now, keep in mind on fillings, please watch my video. There's a few little tricks that you should know about adding fillings or grains into your dough, but you can check all of that out later. But generally, no problem. All works perfectly in this formula. Change it up, start splitting up your white flour, going with a little whole wheat flour. No worries, no problems. Milk, take out half your water, substitute it with milk. Easy, you can do like that. Molasses, go back to molasses. Take out eggs, go into rolled oats. You can see what's happening here. Everything's staying the same, but we are focused on making sure that our base numbers stay the same. Keep in mind also that mix times are very important. Okay, once again, I do have a video upcoming here on mix times, but we're using a white flour all-purpose. Now, we generally know that a white all-purpose flour has a protein usually somewhere between 10 and maybe 12 protein content, whereas a high-protein bread flour will have somewhere between 12 and 14. But all of them are different. And depending on whether you have an all-purpose flour that contains conditioners or anything else like that in there, you really got to be kind of thinking about your mix times and the impact of the flour that you're using will give you. But as a general rule of thumb and a guideline, white flour, all-purpose flour, I'm saying it's going to be between 8 and 10 minutes. That should be kind of where you're targeting. You start blending it down with some whole wheats or coarser grains, you can see that the mix times start to fall. As you start incorporating oats and grains and seeds and these types of things, maybe, that have a little bit more coarseness, you're also seeing your mix times fall as a general rule. So keep that in mind as you start adding and veering away from white flour, your mix times generally are reduced. Now, if you're kneading on a table by hand, you may see yourself up at the higher ends of these scales. But if you got a good mixing machine that's efficient and does a really good job, and you got your speeds right on it, this should be really where you should be at with your mixing machine. Now, if you're starting baking too, and you're not really sure of your flour, yes, we've built some security into it. We're operating at around 58%, but there's one more little hack that you can put in there, and that is vital wheat gluten. I highly recommend you giving it a try. It will really cover up a lot of mistakes, but once again, this is all dependent upon mixing. You really have to be focused on mixing. Putting your ingredients all together in some type of a formula is one thing, but being really focused on the mixing stage is where bakers make it or break it in most instances. Really concentrate on developing out your gluten, and we will be talking about that. But you can add vital wheat gluten at 2 to 5% based on flour, and you're going to have an amazing results. Bigger oven spring, generally better volume. It really is a fantastic little hack that new bakers can use to kind of help them so you don't have to struggle so much with producing flatter loaves. It gives you a little bit more tolerance to overproofing and undermixing potentially. So vital wheat gluten is a really nice little addition to add into the equation. Okay, now I mentioned about trying to figure out a scaling weight based on the finished weight of the product that you're looking for. So if we have a desired finished weight of around a pound, because we have a 1 pound loaf pan, 450 grams, let's just round it down from 454. If you add 130 grams to that, ultimately to 580, you're going to be real darn close to your finished weight at the end of the baking cycle. Generally a rule, most breads, depending on how long you bake them and the temperatures, of course, that you're baking and the type of bread that it is, you add 120 to 130 grams to the desired finished weight to arrive at your scaling weight, you're real close. So in this instance, we want 2 loaves. So we're going to multiply our scaling weight, 580 grams times 2, we need 1,160 grams of total batch weight. So then what I'll do is I'll just go and I'll say, okay, well, let's take a look at my flour. So instead of 1,000 grams, I'm going to throw down 750 grams and say that this is 100%. I know my water's 58%. So what is 58% of 750? Well, real quickly, it's 435 milliliters or grams, and so I can quickly add this up. Boom, I am totally in the ballpark here. And I could maybe even adjust it down a little bit more if I wanted to get closer. But this is a really good down and dirty, quick method for determining whether you are close on your recipe. Now, this doesn't include salt, you know, sugar, yeast, any of the other wonderful things that you might have in there. So as you start taking a look at the quantities of those ingredients into your recipe, you can just knock this down a little bit more and ultimately get your recipe real darn close. When I see information out there and people showing their bread products that they've made, first-time bakers, this type of thing, one of the things that I notice a lot is that many of the challenges stem from incorrect mixing. 90% of the time, undermixed breads. And you can just see it in the finished loaf volume. They're not getting the oven spring that they want. Generally, the proofing, as the product's a little bit weaker. Sometimes it can collapse. This is all a direct result of mixing. Having a really good formula is one thing. The most important part of the first stages, whether you make or break your loaf of bread, is mixing. Now remember the window pane test. That is really key. You really want to make sure that you've got that nice transparent, nice elastic feel, but you've got that transparent little window where you can almost see through it. This is really, really important to make sure that you get to that point. Otherwise, you will have issues as a direct result. It's so important to develop out the gluten in your dough. Developing gluten is one thing, but you also want to develop your gluten in a timely manner. So we talked a little bit about mix times. It's really kind of important to target your baking and make sure that your mixing equipment is capable of delivering, a properly developed dough within a reasonable amount of time and at the right temperature. So if you have a machine that has a poor attachment on it or some type of hybrid paddle that's, they say can do dough, but it's taking a lot longer to mix out and develop your gluten in there, then you may need to really start thinking about going with colder water, kind of compensating on the temperature of your water to ensure that if your mix times are extended, that your dough is not becoming overly warm. Hot doughs, they have a tendency to, especially with yeast in them, they have a tendency to start aging very quickly. They start getting puffy. And my goodness, I mean, if you've got a warm dough because you've had to mix for a long period of time in your mixer bowl, it can turn into a real nasty little mess before you even got it out of the mixer. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to make our first dough. So the very first thing that you need to do is you need to locate a recipe that you like. Find a formula that you want to try. It could be on YouTube, it could be on the internet somewhere, maybe even out of your favorite cookbook. But find the formula that you want to do, make sure that it's not too difficult to start off with, and away you go. So what I highly recommend, as I mentioned before, is to make sure you convert your recipe to metric. It will help you out a lot. If you're used to using the imperial system, I apologize, but I can't stress this enough, that it really helps with the ability to look at baker's percentages and be able to analyze your formulas and share them with other people. So convert it to grams, and if you can, set it up into baker's percent. Much easier and much better. Adjust your formula, whatever it is, to 58% hydration. Let's just start at 58% and build from there. It's a nice safety zone. It'll cover off all-purpose flour. It'll also cover off high-protein bread flour. Now, if you feel like it's a little bit stiff, maybe bump it up a percentage point or two, especially if you're using a really good quality flour. But as a general rule of thumb, try to make it work in and around the 58. You will get much better results and be a lot happier, I think, at the end of your baking day. Now, salt, remember that. No matter what their formula says, better to have salt at 2% and have your yeast at 1%, just as a starting guideline so you can feel out the environmental conditions in your kitchen, seasonality issues, hot temperatures, cold temperatures, and these types of things. So start in around here, really good guideline to start with. Make sure you mix your dough to full development. We talked about this, can't stress it enough. Really focus and concentrate on your mixing. Take a look at your dough, feel the temperature of it as it's developing, and make sure that you stretch that out and try to get a really nice transparent window pane forming with your gluten. Very, very important. Whatever your recipe calls for, follow the procedure. And if it wants you to take the dough and then let it sit for 45 minutes and then punch the dough down and then maybe reshape it and let it sit again, whatever the process is, follow the process exactly. Very important because there's a number of different types of processes, and it's always good to make sure that you are working through the process as they've laid it out. Calculate your pan capacity. Another thing very important. Just do a length times width times height in centimeters. That will give you your total pan capacity. And if you want to know how much dough is going to fit in there and work really nice for you, then scale your dough at 45 to 55% of the pan capacity, and that is a calculation for success. And lastly, try adding vital wheat gluten, 2 to 5%. Just throw it right in on top. Like I said, if you're using a high protein bread flour and then you're going to throw gluten in it, and maybe you go to the higher level, you might want to bump your water up to 60, but feel it out. And, you know, if you can get away with that stiffer dough, I highly recommend that you do it. It'll be much easier for handling and processing for you. It'll slow things down a little bit with yeast activity also, gives you a lot more flexibility, and ultimately save you a lot of grief than going with dough that's a little bit too soft. Thank you for watching the video, and I did want to mention that all of the stuff that we covered off can totally be used for making buns, hamburger buns, or a whole wheat bun, or a dinner bun, raisin bun, etc. Same program, except change the scaling weights. So find a recipe, see what type of scaling weight that they're using. Same things apply, yeah, bread, buns, it's all right there. You've got the tools to work with now. The next video I'm going to be doing, which kind of follows this one up, is about process. It's the second area where I see many people make mistakes. You can spend all this time developing beautiful gluten. You've got a really awesome formula, and then you're just not shaping it correctly. You're not applying the tensions that you need, and you end up with a loaf, unfortunately, that is less than satisfactory. So some minor things to learn here. I'm going to show you the secrets, and that'll be coming up next. So anyway, see you next time. No BS baking.